Stay tuned for Truckers Life Radio, coming up next on tncradio.live.
Hey, y'all, this is Curtis Grimes, and I want to give a shout out and a special thank you to everyone associated with tncradio.live.
Hello and welcome to tncradio.live. This is Truckers Life Radio. And now here's your host, Ron Frazier.
Welcome to Truckers Life Radio on tncradio.live. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, we are a radio program that is dedicated to helping drivers on life's highway. As we begin our program, we want to encourage you to contact us at truckerslife@tncradiolive should you have any questions or even possibly a story of your own that you would like to share. I'm Ron Frazier, your host, along with Derek Thompson, our co-host. And Derek, you have a special guest for us today.
Yes, I do, Ron, and I am so excited about today's conversation. We're here with Carl Thomas, and Carl is an ordained pastor, published author, certified neurohealth coach, CEO of XXX Church, founder of Live Free Community app. I could probably go on, but more importantly, Carl is just a really down-to-earth guy, very generous, and someone who I count as a friend. And so, Carl, we're so excited to have you on today.
Hey, thank you for having me on. You're high praise there. I don't know if I deserve all that, but thank you.
Yeah. Well, it's quite of a list of accomplishments, Carl. And yeah, you're someone I've been really looking up to this past year, getting to know you better. And I know you have a real heart for men and for sexual health and purity. And I'd love for our listeners just to kind of get to know you better in this first segment, So, Carl, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, as I say in the book, I'm just a guy from Jersey, but 50 years old, dealt with porn most of my adult life. I mean, I'm not old enough to say, more than 50% of it. And maybe by the time I'm 80, I can say less than 50%. But, high school, college, I was dealing with this stuff before the internet was even a thing, as crazy as that sounds.
Yep.
Took that addiction, if you want to call it that, into my marriage when I was around 30. Struggled with it back in up and down like a lot of guys. Found freedom around 39 through a series of basically just God-ordained events or accidents, you might even say. There are accidents on my end, ordained on his end, I believe. And then I was an insurance agent for 17 years, running my family's agency. And then I just felt that I was supposed to do something in the ministry world. And opportunity came to work for XXX Church. And so I did that, and I was with them for 7 years, doing all sorts of things, specifically on the websites, marketing, running their small groups program that I basically built. Yeah. And all that, quit there twice. So the second time I quit, I launched Live Free Ministries. We launched something called the Live Free Community app, which is an online community for men struggling with porn and sex issues or whatever, any sort of unwanted sexual behavior. A year later, we launched Live Free Wives. I don't run that. I just launched it, but we actually have a woman running app for spouses. We have the small groups program, which we actually acquired from XXX Church. And then it seems like this past, but no, last March, I guess that would be this past March. Yeah. Almost a year ago, we acquired XXX Church, which was kind of a crazy turn of events. And then the book came out just last week. That was something that was not on my radar whatsoever, but a publisher approached me back in April and said, "Hey, you ever thought about writing a book?" And I said, "Thought about it." I thought about being the president of the United States, but didn't really pursue that. And he just said, "Hey, look, I like your writing. I think you got an important message to say." And so I said, "Okay, let's do it." So jumped into that, wrote that all, most of last year, spent a lot of time writing between running the ministry and then also writing. And like I said, then it came out last week, and everything else is history. But it's been a pretty crazy 10 years since I found freedom from porn. Never could have scripted any of it. Never would have scripted any of it. I mean, it's just nuts. And just thankful to be where I am right now.
Yeah. Hey, I'm excited to delve into the book, because I know that is pretty fresh. I think it just went live, if you will, just last week. Is that correct?
Yeah, Tuesday it was available was actually available for sale and not pre-order or whatever.
Right. Yep. So, and we'll be getting into that, but tell our viewers a little bit more about XXX Church. It is I think, fairly well known. It's been around for a while. And what are some of the resources there on XXX Church?
Yeah, so XXX Church, I mean, they were pretty much, I'd say, the first one in this space that really openly talked about this stuff. It was founded by a guy named Craig Gross. He was a bit of a shocking type personality. That was kind of his modus operandi, was let's create shock value and get attention, which got a lot of attention, some good, some bad.
That's what attention does, right?
Yeah, but it got the conversation started, and like I said, that was over 20 years ago. Probably more well known in the media for its unorthodox missions strategy, which was going to sex shows and porn shows and handing out Bibles and say Jesus loves porn stars, later T-shirts.
Yes,
but
I remember
the reality is, while that was kind of like the grabbing headline, right? The reality is it's always been more about recovery and prevention. They had something called X3 Watch software, which is still out. That's not really part of XXX Church anymore, even though we recommend it. That's still owned by the previous administration, if you will. It's not our resource. Right. But that's always been really where the majority of the operations are. And so when we acquired it, the reason we acquired it in March was I spent a lot of my life, 7 years of my life working there, building programs, seeing all sorts of things, trying things that sometimes worked, sometimes didn't work, right? Sometimes got criticism, sometimes got praise. But it was a pretty wild ride up and down. It definitely helped prepare me for what I'm looking at now, because I just built a whole bunch of skill sets that I never had before I started working there. And but the last 2 years before we took it over, it was kind of dying on the vine. The previous founder, he stepped away to pursue other things. We'll just leave it at that. Nothing I'm particularly down with, but whatever. Yeah. And so it just kind of hung there and didn't have any real leadership or anything like that. And it was a shame to see the brand and what it used to stand for kind of decline. And people just didn't talk about it that much anymore because it was irrelevant. And so we made the move to say, hey, can we acquire it? Because I think this brand still has some good work to do.
Definitely. I
think that we can use it to really help people. And so that's what we did. We acquired it, shifted the focus a bit. It's still, about prevention and helping. Well, not really prevention. It's still about raising awareness. I use that word sparingly because it's not just awareness, but like talking about things, bringing the conversation to people, forcing the conversation, if you will. And then not just stopping there, but pointing people to resources. So, hey, let's talk about this. Let's talk about how your life might be kind of off the rails here because of sex or porn. And by the way, hey, we have these online, healthy, supportive communities that we can point you to. Yeah. And that's kind of where XXX Church's sweet spot is now. It's, hey, we're here to bring the issue to the forefront and then point you in the right direction of where you can get some quality help.
Hey, that's awesome, Carl. Well, it's definitely in good hands. And we're going to be taking a commercial break here in a second, but excited to get into the book, When Shame Gets Real, and the subtitle, A New Way to Talk About Sex, Porn, and Masturbation. And what you just kind of mentioned, there was this kind of like this an old way of talking about anti-pornography and intervention and resources. And, even some of the things that were created 10, 15, 20 years ago were really good at the time, they needed to bring that kind of shock value and at least get the conversation started. But a lot has changed over the past 10 to 15, 20 years. And people that have been in that space have learned a lot, including yourself. And so now it's kind of like, what's the, not necessarily the latest and greatest, but what have we learned over the past, and what have you learned over the past 15 to 20 years or so about this, and how to advance the conversation and to make it healthier and more productive for people. So that's where we're going to get into, but we got to take a quick break, and we will be back with Carl Thomas.
This is Alec Debogorski. Catch our new show, Taillights, Tuesday nights at 6 p.m. Central on tncradio.live.
Hi, I'm Dr. Christopher Cortman, and now for the Mental Health Minute. Very often I'll have a patient who'll come in and tell me about symptoms of anxiety or about depression, and they're not sure where it's coming from. They just know that they're hurting and that they have many symptoms that they'd like to see relieved. And I'll ask them to do something for me that helps me to identify what is the chief contributor to their issue. I'll ask them to draw me a pie chart. Have you ever seen a pie chart before? I'm sure you have. Like the government has a pie chart. It's shaped like a pie and it shows spending. And say 40% of it is military and 20% is education or whatever it is, the total makes up 100% of the pie. So I'll ask somebody, draw me a pie chart of your depression. Or how about a pie chart that says, I am your anxiety? Where is the anxiety coming from? And it's fascinating to see the results because people will often draw a giant slice that has to do with their work or their relationship or something from the past that they can't seem to get over. But that gives me the clue to know where to go to help them to finally heal. Try it.
Be sure to listen to Building Strong Minds with Dr. Chris, Mondays at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central, right here on tncradio.live.
Don't miss Marcia Campbell, North America's trucking sweetheart, Thursdays at 6 p.m. Central on tncradio.live.
Welcome back to Truckers Life Radio with Ron Fraser, right here on tncradio.live.
Hey, welcome back to Truckers Life Radio. This is Derek Thompson, and I'm having a conversation with Carl Thomas. And Carl, it was great to get to know you a little bit better in the first segment. And now I know you just released your latest book called When Shame Gets Real, and a new way to talk about sex, porn, and masturbation. And Carl, I'd love to know kind of what the inspiration was behind this book, because there is a lot, there's quite a lot of material out there right now in anti-pornography, the anti-pornography field. What led you to see this as a really important topic, and why you felt this was important to write? Okay, well, I'll give you both the short answer and the long answer. So I love it. the short answer is what led me to write this book. A publisher called me and said, "Hey, do you want to write a book?" Right. Yeah, that's a very short answer. Yeah, that's the short answer because, like I said earlier, maybe it was a bucket list item, like, oh, that'd be cool. But just the idea of writing and then marketing it around. Hey, do you want it's just super exhausting just even thinking about it. And I've never been one of these people where it's, oh, hey, I'm trying to build a platform or this or that. I don't really care about that much stuff too much. So just the opportunity came and I said, okay. But I will say that I'd say it was God's timing, because if this opportunity had come, say, 5 years ago, the subject
might have been very, very different. Only because the last 2.5 to 3 years of working with Live Free in the community, dealing directly with men that are dealing with this stuff, not from an administration level where it's, hey, how's it going? Okay, sounds good. What's the feedback? Let's tweak this. But literally jumping into conversations and seeing guys post and having direct messages back and forth, like just being in their daily life. Yeah, you get a very different, idea or feel for what they're going through. Although, again, I have my own history, so I know kind of what they're going through, but it's 10 years ago. So sometimes you lose a little perspective. Definitely. And getting to see just the comments and the conversations. And one thing that just really stands out is just the tremendous shame all these guys feel. And not only just the shame they feel, but the resistance to push that aside. So, I've had guys say to me, oh yeah, I feel so terrible. I feel so shameful. And I've challenged them in a healthy way saying, man, listen, what you do is not who you are, right? It's just what you do. And we can get around that, but you shouldn't feel like a piece of crap because you're dealing with this stuff, right? Like this is just something that we have to contend with. And it's been shocking to have the pushback and have guys say, no, you don't get it. Right. A guy who's been there. Like I've been there. I said, what do you mean? Of course I get it. Yeah. No, you don't know my story. No, almost to the point where, hey, shame is deserved in my case. I don't deserve anything but shame. And it's just sad because I know that's not true, but sometimes they just don't want to hear that. They're too convinced that who they are is this person that has no self-control, no connection with God, unworthy husbands, whatever. Yeah. And it's just, it's debilitating. Right. And then on top of that, just the past couple of years, I mean, this is longer than the past couple of years, but fielding questions on the XXX church side, especially from parents, even church leaders, where you get these, I don't want to say they're bizarre questions. They're actually very normal questions, but questions about healthy sex and what do I do about my kid that just found porn at 15? Should I talk to him about it? And some of the stuff where for me, it's almost, man, what do you mean, should you? Right. You're kind of 7 years too late to the party here, my man. But just seeing these things, dealing with some churches where, hey, listen, let's launch a recovery plan for your church. Well, yeah, we'd love to, but we don't know where to start. We don't know. That just sounds really hard. And it's like, yeah, it is hard, but that doesn't mean you don't do it. So it's just, and all this is, the common theme is shame, right? It's this idea that, hey, we don't really know how to talk about it. And when we do talk about it, we feel weird. We feel awkward. We even feel shameful at times because we've grown up with this belief that these things are taboo, they're sacred cows that should only be addressed in the dark recesses or corners of the church, right? On a Tuesday night at 8 p.m. when no one's around. I mean, that's the way we've kind of grown up believing, and it's not the way it should be. And so, the spoiler alert is, the subtitle of the book is A New Way to Talk About Sex, Porn, and Masturbation. The spoiler alert is, it's not really a new way. Right. It's just a healthy way. I mean, it's the way it should have always been. Let's just talk about this stuff in the open. Let's address these things as just a part of life. Granted, not a great part of life, but they're just a part of life, and we have to deal with it. Yeah. Let's stop treating it like it's this toxic thing that we can only certain people deal with, and let's not talk about it in our small groups. Let's not talk about it at the dinner table. Let's not talk about it with our spouses in an open conversation. Let's only deal with it in support groups or private communities like Live Free, or with a therapist. Yeah, like it's this big scary topic, and you just can't have a normal, healthy conversation about it. What I find interesting, Carl, is how shame is kind of baked into the experience. I shared recently in one of our Highway News articles about my first time seeing pornography. And it was a classic story. There was a Playboy magazine in the woods.
And it was right before a baseball game. Yeah, it was now I see it as such a typical experience for many people. And I remember viewing this magazine for the first time. I was probably 11, 12 years old. And before that time, I didn't even know what pornography was. No one ever talked to me about it. I had no kind of context for what I was seeing. And yet, what I share is the two feelings I had was a little bit of pleasure and a whole lot of shame. So for me, the shame happened immediately. As I was viewing this, I felt shame. And what it was telling me, Carl, was I can never tell anybody about this, right? Like, I immediately just like, I'm going to shut down. So what do you think it is about pornography that elicits that? And yeah, we'll get into kind of like the new way to talk about it, but why is shame just so kind of baked into the experience?
So shame is particularly dangerous because a good friend of mine, he's a friend of mine, I wouldn't call him a good friend, but a friend of mine, Jay Stringer, who also wrote a great book called Unwanted.
Oh yeah.
He talks about it. He talks about it a bit in his book, the idea that shame is a precursor or kind of the catalyst for our behaviors in the first place, right? We've, even myself, 6-7 years ago, I approached this thing as, hey, when we dive into unwanted sexual behaviors, we feel shame, which is true, but it goes way deeper than that, right? It's the shame that we've grown up with for a variety of reasons, right? That aren't even necessarily sexually related. But it's the shame that we grow up with, which drives us to these unwanted sexual behaviors in the first place. And what makes shame so dangerous, in my opinion, is it's not only the fuel for the fire, but then it's a replenishing fuel, right? So if you will, take a campfire. You pour kerosene on wood to get the fire started, right?
Yep.
Within 30, 45 seconds, that kerosene's gone.
Right.
And now it's just burning on the wood until that dies off. But shame is, think of it as kerosene. And then as the fire burns, it produces more kerosene, which gives it even a hotter temperature. And that's kind of the way shame is. It's the catalyst, but it's a self-fulfill or a constantly replenishing catalyst. It never runs out. So, hey, these shame issues in my life have driven me to this place where I'm, looking at porn, going to prostitutes, going to strip clubs, whatever. And now every time I act out, it reinforces the fact that I already have these shameful thoughts about myself in the first place. And so now I'm back to square one, and now I need to get out again. So I'm going to act out again. And it's just this kind of never-ending circle, which is why I tell guys all the time, if you can't get past the shame in your life, your success in getting free from these things is going to be, I'm not going to say you can't get away from some of this stuff, but I'm going to say your complete freedom is probably not going to happen, right? You're going to be limited.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. You got to deal with the shame first. That's powerful. And that's going to lead us right into our next segment. And I'm excited about what you just shared, Carl, because it is, sometimes we get it backwards. We think, okay, let me stop the behavior first that's producing the shame, and then I'll feel better about myself and I won't have shame anymore. But what I'm hearing you say, and I think is so important, is first we got to deal with the shame, and behavior change can come after that. But if we keep thinking we're just dirty, no good, rotten, scoundrel people, and then we try to change, it's not going to go so well. So yeah, dealing with shame first. We're going to get into that more in our next segment, but for now we need to take a quick commercial break.
For the latest in Houston traffic, weather, news, and information, don't miss The Evening Surge on TNCRadio.live.
You're listening to Truckers Life Radio on TNCRadio.live.
Hi, I'm Dr. Christopher Cortman, and now for the Mental Health Minute. So I'm working with a woman, and she tells me that every Sunday she calls home to hear a litany of criticisms and complaints from her mother about the way she's living her life. And she says, most Sundays I hang up in tears. And I said to her, you're never going to stop calling your mother on Sundays, are you? And she says, no, I really need to do that. I said, okay. What if we try something a little different this time? I said. She said, okay, what would that be? I said, why don't we make a list of 10 things that you think your mother is likely to say. And when she says any of them, check it off. Instead of getting upset or hurt or challenging it, just check off. Let's see how you do. She said, well, that's interesting. The next week she came back into session, and before I could even sit down, she said, I got 8 out of 10. I got 8 out of 10. She was so excited. I said, what are you talking about? She said, what that list you gave me to do. I wrote down 10 things that my mother might say, and I got 8 of them right. I'm so excited. So excited. A week ago, tears. She said, now I understand, and I can even predict what my mother's likely to say. So here's the point. People stay in character. Mom's going to be mom. Jerry's going to be Jerry. Jennifer's going to be Jennifer. They're probably going to stay as they are throughout the entire movie of your life. When we start to understand and expect what people are going to do, we're less inclined to be upset by their behavior.
Be sure to listen to Building Strong Minds with Dr. Chris, Mondays at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central, right here on tncradio.live. I'm Shelley Johnson with Kathy Tuccaro. You can hear us Tuesdays on tncradio.live at 8 p.m. Eastern on Women Road Warriors. And don't miss Steve Summers' Overnight Drive right here on tncradio.live, weeknights midnight to 5 a.m. Eastern. Brought to you by Hot Shot Secret.
Hey, welcome back to Truckers Life Radio on tncradio.live. I'm Derek Thompson and been having a conversation with Carl Thomas, who just recently wrote a book, When Shame Gets Real, a new way to talk about sex, porn, and masturbation. And before the commercial break, Carl, we were talking about how important it is to deal with shame first. Oftentimes that we need to deal with shame first in order to then have some behavioral change and change some of the things. It doesn't just have to be pornography. It could be anything, any behavior that's creating shame. Oftentimes, it's that shame that's causing that cycle, as you said, the kerosene that just keeps adding fuel to the fire. And many of our listeners, you know, we are a radio station for professional drivers and truck drivers, and many of them are, you know, in the car or in the truck for many, many hours. There's some isolation, and we know many of them struggle with this issue that we're talking about, the shame that comes with pornography addiction. And I wonder, Carl, if you could share what you see are healthy ways to deal with shame. How can we begin, even when we're kind of still in the midst of the behavior? What are ways that we can deal with shame in a healthy way?
So there's a chapter in the book towards the end, actually, called Deep Work, right? And I go into the idea that basically, listen, getting past shame is not as simple as a switch, a flip of the switch, right?
Right.
This is something that's kind of built into us. And, you know, again, spoiler alert, we're always going to have the tendency to have, or we're always going to feel shame on some level at times in our life, right? Like sometimes when we don't expect it. And again, shame is much wider topic than just sexual, right? So It could just be, hey, I feel great. I'm happy with, you know, I'm confident in who I am, and I have this and I have that. But then you have a really bad day at work and you feel like you completely blew it. And that's when you're going to have that opportunity come up where you're going to say, oh gosh, I feel kind of like I'm a loser. right?
Yeah.
And you're going to have to address that. So this is something you have to deal with all your life. And the question is, well, how do you deal with it? And a lot of it just comes down to awareness, like being aware of what you're dealing with is a feeling. And hey, look, feelings are what they are, right? I mean, we have them. It's natural. We're supposed to have them, but they're not something that we have to live our life by, right? In fact, we should not live our life simply by feelings, right? Feelings are just kind of a warning. They're your body's warning system that something's not quite right. And then you're supposed to kind of process that out and think through it. So how do you deal with the shame? First of all, and I'll just give you the bullet points, but like I said, this is a process. First thing is look at your identity. Shame, one of the things that makes shame so dangerous is the fact that it eviscerates our identity, right? And that's what it preys on, is this idea of, hey, you did this, and so you are that, right? This is who you are. This is your DNA. It's not just a mistake or a bad choice or whatever. No, this is who you are, and that you couldn't be more wrong, right? But so many people, Christian, non-Christian, doesn't matter, and I would put myself in that category at times in my life. So many of us find our identity in the wrong things. I've dealt with pastors who, to be honest, their life is kind of blowing up, and they don't want to step back for a season and kind of get things under control, because the idea of losing that pastor designation cripples them. If I'm not a pastor, if I'm not helping people, I'm no good anymore. And so they rest their identity in their role versus who God says they are, which is your identity is in Jesus. And so identity is huge, right? And if you're putting your identity in your performance or some sort of analytics or even your roles, the role you have, or your behaviors, you're dealing with basically a moving target, right? Your identity is not set or solid. It's always in flux, and that's no way to live. I say in the book too, the thing is this: when we rest our identity in our performance, it's this struggle to become enough in our minds, right? Hey, am I enough? If I do this, I'll finally be enough. And the reality is, you'll never be enough. I'll never be enough. That's the truth. So when we say, hey, our identity is in Jesus, it sounds like just a really nice pithy thing that you say from the front of the church. But the idea is, no, you're not enough. Jesus is enough, and that's why we get our identity in Him, because God says, hey, my son is enough, so therefore you are enough, right? Right. But we have too much pride to accept that at times, and so we feel like, no, that's good, thanks God, but I need to do more. Yeah, and that you couldn't be right, and we couldn't be more wrong. And so our identity is a big thing. Second thing is, honestly, I talk about basically our why statement. Simon Sinek has a great book out about that. But just, what is your why in life? Why are you here? What is your passion? So many people's whys are, again, revolved around or basically tied into things that should not be basically our purpose for living. And again, when we put the reason we live, and we tie that to some sort of measure of success that we have no control over, we're bound for failure and shame. The third thing is, we have to identify the sources of conditional love in our life, because usually that's where the shame begins. It's in those often family structures from when you were a kid, the fact that maybe your parents assigned you a certain role. Hey, you're the smart kid. Hey, you're the athletic kid. Hey, you're the dumb kid, right? Right. And you need to behave a certain way to be accepted by us. And a lot of times we know in the back of our mind, we can never meet those demands of conditional love, which creates stress, which creates shame. I'm not worthy. I'm not, I don't deserve this, because that's what we've been fed.
Also, like, Carl, would you also like a parent abandoning, leaving a child at an early age? Same kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Because they left, and our assumption, especially as a child, is, hey, they left because there's something wrong with me.
Exactly.
And so that's where these sources of shame begin, is in these formative years usually, but then it gets reinforced throughout life, right? It's not just family, it's now school kids. It's now your friends calling you the short kid or the unathletic kid. It can be employers.
Yeah. It's interesting now too, Carl, is even how social media now reinforces it just by its nature, watching other people's lives. And we all, of course, are putting our best life, on social media, and for a lot of young people again, but also I think even us as adults, we see that, you mentioned pastors too, now with like the celebrity pastor status and seeing people's sermons get, 100,000 likes. I'm sure that can create some shame in pastors, but also in young people as we're seeing people's lives on social media and just feeling like we don't measure up kind of thing.
Absolutely. I actually have a chapter in a book called Anti-Social Media Malaise. And that was the toughest chapter for me to write, basically because it seemed the most, it isn't, but it wasn't a natural fit with the overall theme of the book. It did work and it does fit, but it was a tough write for me. Like that chapter took a couple weeks to get through. But I go into that quite a bit because honestly, I'm on social media by necessity, right? Yep. Mm-hmm. I think social media is a cesspool 90% of the time.
I have a love-hate relationship with it too. You have to be on there. Yep.
I just don't see it helpful 99% of the time. In fact, in the book I talk about, I poke fun of it. I don't throw names under the bus, but I poke fun at a couple by LinkedIn headlines. Like, on LinkedIn, you have you can write up to 2 or 3 sentences of who you are.
Right.
Several of those, I don't say it, but several of those are pastors. And it's these pastor, leader, life coach, entrepreneur extraordinaire, like some of these really boastful taglines.
Right.
And I'm reading these kind of like my stomach's turning, thinking to myself, man, the self-promotion is just insane.
Yep.
And then this was this was maybe 4 or 5 months ago. I'm reading through some, and then I look at my headline. I'm like, dude, you're doing the same thing. What is wrong with you? Right. So I deleted everything. I deleted my entire headline, father, this, I just deleted all and I put just the guy from Jersey. That was it.
I love it. Yes. Right.
Now it says just the guy from Jersey, author of When Shame Gets Real, for obvious reasons, but that's where I stop it. And I'm not bragging, but hey, if you're going to look at other people and say, hey, this is ridiculous, you can't basically commit the same sins. But social media, everybody's putting their best foot forward. Everybody's trying to get the right pick, right? The right angle, the right filter. And we don't see real life. But of course, if you're struggling with some real brokenness in your life, the assumption is, hey, they're living the good life. I'm living the not so good life. And probably the reason is I don't deserve the good life because of these things I'm doing, which again, could it be farther from the truth? But that's kind of where we jump to.
Yep. Yeah. So, man, such an important topic. And again, because, what I'm hearing here is that shame can come from so many different places in our life, our childhood, obviously behavior that we're doing that creates that shame, social media. There's a lot of different ways that we get the message that we're not good enough, we're not worthy of people's love or respect or attention. And this can then reinforce that bad behavior. So we're going to have to take a commercial break here, but when we come back, I really want to delve into how all of us, and especially our listeners, how can we really turn the ship around when it comes to our shame, and again, even how we're talking about ourselves. And I think that maybe would be interesting because a lot of the ways shame starts registering is in our inner voice and what we're telling ourselves, and paying attention to that's probably going to be really, really important. So we're going to take a quick commercial break and we will be back with Carl Thomas.
Hey, rideshare drivers and gig economy workers, the host of TNCRadio.live, the Rideshare Rodeo Podcast, and the Gig Economy Podcast come together for news, talk, music, stories, laughs, and more. We're live Fridays at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central, right here on TNCRadio.live.
I'm Ron Samuels. We put it in reverse gear so you can enjoy the history of popular music and hear the soundtrack of life Wednesdays at 8 Eastern and 7 Central, right after the train station on tncradio.live.
I'm Shelley Johnson with Kathy Tuccaro. You can hear us Tuesdays on tncradio.live at 8 p.m. Eastern on Women Road Warriors. And don't miss Steve Summers' Overnight Drive right here on tncradio.live. Weeknights midnight to 5 a.m. Eastern. Brought to you by Hot Shot Secret.
Hey, you're listening to Truckers Life Radio on tncradio.live. And we are finishing up our conversation here with Carl Thomas. And Carl, I always wish that we had more time to talk. There's so much more for us to unpack. But in this last segment, I'd really like to help our listeners know, how do we turn this shame thing around? If we can share this as quick as possible, what are some ways that we can deal with some of these identity issues that are telling us we're not good enough, we don't measure up, and maybe even for those that don't have immediate access to, a counselor or a pastor. What can people do, kind of like right now in the moment?
Okay. Well, first, if you do have access, though, I would say that's counseling. Yeah. I definitely recommend counseling. I was never growing up, I was never a believer in counseling for myself, because in the back of my mind, it was, well, you're not crazy. You don't need a counselor, right? The most ridiculous perspective ever. But that's the way I thought about it. And until I got crippled with anxiety and having crazy panic attacks, and finally I broke down and went to a counselor, and then realized where a lot of it was coming from, which, quite frankly, for me, a lot of it came from shame issues in my life, and this idea of having to be enough, needing to be a better performer, dealing with imposter syndrome, things like that. So counseling's huge. Yeah. If you can't do professional counseling because of insurance reasons or whatever, yes, pastoral counseling is maybe a great option. Of course, it depends on the pastor, right? But pastoral counseling could certainly be good. Usually pastoral counseling short-term, though, just realize that. Yep. For some people, and that's not a lot of men, I would say, at least I wouldn't have thrown myself in that category before. Things have changed in my life. But if you're a naturally introspective person, right, and you have a high level of self-awareness, you can probably process through a lot of this stuff on your own if you have the right materials and things, and go through the right workbooks and questions and stuff like that. You might be able to do a lot of this on your own in terms of just kind of wrestling through some of these issues. Yeah. But I would say the most practical and easiest thing to do, at least, is jump into some sort of community. And we are creatures wired for community. A lot of us don't think that. Probably because, especially when you're dealing with sexual issues, probably because of the shame, right? We feel that privacy and secrecy and solitary, whatever, you know what I'm saying? Solitude. Isolation. There you go. Isolation, solitude, whatever. We think those things are actually the good things. Those are the things that are going to keep us safe and healthy, and it's the absolute wrong way to go. It's 100% the opposite, right? And so community can become really, really important in a person's life, even if you're not doing the counseling, even if you're not doing the introspection or the reading. If you're in a healthy, that's an important one, but if you're in a healthy, accepting community, where you're going to probably get some encouragement, but also hopefully get some healthy accountability, you're going to run into some bumps, right? When you start throwing out the shame language, and you're going to hear from people and say, what are you talking about? Right? I don't see that. I don't see that. And after you hear from 7 different people saying, I don't see it that way, I think you're kind of off on this, right? This isn't who you are. That's a moment to pause and say, maybe I got it wrong, right? Maybe my boss is yelling at me because my boss is kind of a jerk, not because I'm a loser employee, right? So community is really important. And we not only to kind of uncover some of the shame issues in your life, but also because as you work this process out, right, you're going to need people to talk to. And a safe community like Live Free, right, is a place where you can talk about these really sensitive topics and feel safe, feel supported, and feel accepted, right? That's important, because if you're trying to break out the shame shell, and the first time you say something to somebody and they say, "What's wrong with you, you pervert?" Boom, you're right back to square one. So definitely important for that. And then also, quite honestly, you're still going to have, again, moments in your life where it's going to flashback, right? It's going to come at you hard. And oh, man, I made so much progress and then I blew it. Or, oh, I made so much progress and then this guy just reinforced the fact that I really am a loser. And so when you face those challenges in your life, you're going to need that community of support to come around and say, no, man, that's not right. You know, that guy was off base, not you. And B, you need to keep going. You know, you've come so far. Don't give up now. Keep going. So I would say community is the most practical and essential component of all this. But yes, if you can couple that with some counseling, some good materials to help you process this stuff out internally, you're going to be that much farther ahead of the game.
Yeah. And, you know, I love that, Carl. And I will get into the Live Free community app, which is a great place for people to turn to for that community. And having being on the Live Free community app, what I can say is that the community there is an instant boost to dealing with shame, because dealing with shame in a healthy way, because what you find in that community is that, you know, and this is an important thing when dealing with shame, is that I'm not alone. I'm not the only one that has struggled with this. And there's a community, a large community of people that have had very similar struggles and experiences and are working to overcome it. And just that alone can help begin to change the way we talk about ourselves and how we deal with shame, is knowing that, hey, I'm not alone. There's other people. So, you know, I'm not the worst person in the world. We may still try to convince ourselves, right, Carl, that we still are the worst person in the world. But it becomes harder to convince ourselves of that when we see that other men and women and people have had the same struggles that we've had and are at different levels of dealing with it. So that's been huge. Carl, please let our listeners know where they can go to access some of these resources and find community.
Okay. Well, I mean, first, you know, if you grab the book, you can go to whenshamegetsreal.com. Simple as that. And all the links to get the book are there. Amazon's probably the easiest and best place to get it, but
I can't wait to get my copy, by the way.
Well, thank you. You can get that directly off the website. And I would say I've told a couple of people this, say, hey, listen, honestly, I've talked about the book in the community, and I've said to guys, trust me, this isn't a shameless plug promotion for me to sell more books. I didn't write the book to make a ton of money. First of all, it doesn't work like that anymore in this day and age of publishing. But second of all, I'll be honest, I don't even know what I make per book. I have no clue. I've never asked, don't care. Someday I'll be pleasantly surprised or disappointed. But either way, I think it was like you get a $5 check. Wow, geez. Anyway, so that's good. livefreecommunity.org is where you can get some online safe community. That is, it's $5 a month. That's it. Or less if it's annual. And we have over 1,000 men in there. We have a lot of our leaders in there. It's not just a community, though. We have a lot of courses and free content in there to help guys.
Jam-packed full of resources, which is so powerful.
Yes, they need the process, and sometimes you need some advice on how to process. And it's not just me talking. We've had guys like Doug Weiss in there. We have Jay Stringer's been in there. Therapist Stephen Luff. So we have some guys who are truly experts, not just the guy from Jersey talking all the time. So that's good. And then we also have
Carl, I just want to share that that we do have a private group in the Live Free community app that's specifically for the professional driver. And you guys can get that through gatewayff.org. But if you're interested in the community, one way you can get there is through our private community group in the Live Free community app.
Yeah, which I think is honestly, to your credit, guys. I think that was a great idea because long distance truckers, especially, they have a unique challenge, right?
Yep.
And so having the larger community for some of the everyday stuff, but then having that private community where they can deal with men who are going through the same exact challenges, I think would be very helpful because they understand what it's like to be stuck at a rest stop for 48 hours, or something. Yeah. So I think that's really good. Yeah. And then the other resource we have is smallgroupsonline.com. Honestly, for truckers, that might not work because of the fact that their schedule is always changing, or it may work because they sometimes have control over their schedule. But that is their weekly online video-based, you can call in too, but video-based small groups, and you're meeting with the same 8 to 12 guys every week. It's led by a trained leader. And when you sign up for a small group, you also get free access to the Live Free community as a bonus. So you're in your small group and you have Live Free access on top of that. So those are the three basic materials or resources that I would probably recommend.
Yep. And we'll have links to that in the tncradio.live website. And so we'll be providing the links for that. And Carl, the next time I introduce you, if we ever do this again, it'll be a guy from Jersey. So, or just a guy from Jersey, and all that other stuff. Although it's important, you're just a guy from Jersey, and I really appreciate that about you, Carl. So thank you so much for your time. This has been an awesome conversation. Wish it could have gone at least another hour, but hopefully not too distant future, we'll have you back on.
Sounds great.
All right. Have a good one.
You too, buddy. Thank you.
Yep.
I hope you enjoyed the show. Let us hear from you. Send email to truckerslife@tncradio.live. Stay tuned.
It's Landline Now, followed by Steve Summers' Overnight Drive every night on tncradio.live starting at 11 p.m. Eastern and 10 p.m. Central.